I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Toyota Kluger, which for the first time in Australia is now available with a hybrid powertrain. This is the new 4th generation Kluger, which has been on sale in North America for more than a year as the Highlander. But it's taken some time for right-hand drive production to get started. The Brits got it first, but it's now here in Australia. And we're a market that's had every single one of the 4 generations of Kluger, and it's become something of a mainstay in the Australian market. But traditionally, this has been a V6 vehicle, and the V6 petrol has carried over from the previous 3rd gen Kluger. But really, all of the talk is about this new Kluger hybrid, which pairs the same 2.5 litre petrol 4-cylinder with 3 electric motors that you get in the RAV4 all-wheel drive hybrid, but with even more beef thanks to an uprated front motor here in the Kluger. So it really comes down to a choice of whether you want a more traditional petrol V6 engine, or for a little bit more, whether you want to lower your real-world CO2 and enjoy the benefits of a Toyota hybrid in this larger 7-seat size. In today's video, we're going to jump inside, check out the cabin of the 4th gen Kluger, which now rides on the TNGA-K platform. We'll look at the boot space and discuss the running costs, and then we'll head out onto the road to see whether this is a significant improvement over the outgoing version. The particular Kluger that I'm sitting in here is the top of the range Grande, and Toyota continue to offer 3 variants of the Kluger here in Australia. There's the base GX, which is now better equipped, there's the GXL, and at the top of the tree, there's a Grande. And all 3 of those variants can be teamed with either a 2-wheel drive V6, which is front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive V6, or the hybrid all-wheel drive. Now the V6s start at 47 grand or so, whereas the hybrids enter at about 54 grand. So it's quite a step up to the hybrid in the Kluger, whereas in the RAV4, that step into hybrid is more gentle. And that's because in the RAV4 you can get a hybrid 2-wheel drive, which isn't currently available on the Kluger. Either way, we're going to be focusing mainly on the hybrid in today's video because it really is an interesting option in this large 7-seat family SUV segment. Now, naturally, the Kluger Grande has the best looking and best equipped interior. And the car I've chosen to film with has the optional beige interior, which I think really comes up nicely. The secondary trim is sort of chestnut brown. You also get wood grain in the doors, and while this is certainly not a cheap car, particularly in hybrid all-wheel drive trim, it does feel like just about the final step before you jump into something like a Lexus RX long wheelbase. So what are we actually dealing with here? Well, a completely new interior compared to the outgoing Kluger, and there was a big focus on refinement, both in terms of how much noise there is in the car when you're driving, but also in the use of soft surfaces, and there are a lot more. The dash is plush, the doors are plush, all these inserts, knee pads, armrest, it all feels a step above the previous car. And the seats themselves are actually really lovely. Diamond quilted on the Grande version, they have power adjustment, they have 2-way electric lumbar, and we also have 2-position memory, plus heating and cooling here in the front seats. Large diameter leather steering wheel, it's big, it's a big car, shortcut buttons across that wheel. We look forward at a mix of analog and digital instruments, which works well. The trip computer is very detailed. And over here, there's a mix of good and bad. There's buttons for all the controls that you'd need climate-wise, which is terrific. But unfortunately, Toyota Australia haven't managed to bring the flagship 12-inch touchscreen to our market, which, especially in the Grande, you really think it probably deserves better infotainment. Instead, we have the same 8-inch screen that you get in the RAV4, which is fine in that car, but in something as large as the Kluger, it ends up looking pretty small. There's Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but they do use a cable, whereas many rivals are now switching to wireless. But you do get an 11-speaker JBL stereo here in the Grande that works very well. In addition, there's a sunroof. The rear seat entertainment has now become an option package. But practicality is good, big cup holders, wireless phone charging, lots of USB ports, the same trick center console that you got on the previous Kluger, and acceptable, if not generous, door bins. So up front, it's a pretty good command center. Let's have a look in the back. Now, I should start in the second row by mentioning that the new Kluger is even bigger, 76 millimeters longer in the body, and the old car was hardly petite. It does mean that if you live in the inner city or if you have a smaller garage, you'll want to check on your test drive of the new Kluger that it really does fit in your parking spot, because this is a large family car, at least by our standards here in Australia. But that additional length has gone into space in the second and third row and also in the boot, which we'll look at shortly. Here in the second row though, it's pretty palatial. Headroom isn't massive, but legroom and toe room is really good for my 6-foot frame. And the seats themselves are quite supportive, the angle of the seat base is pretty good, and the length of the squab is also quite decent. Plus, all those solid and soft materials continue here in the back. You get sun blinds in the Grande, which is good for keeping the sun off the face of little ones, and the child seat mounting points couldn't be any more obvious. So fitting baby seats or taking them out back here is going to be nice and easy. Now you'll notice we do have a Blu-ray player on the roof of the Grande. That used to be standard, it's now an option, which I think is an admission that many people now just grab a couple of iPads for their kids on longer road trips, which honestly is a better system, so I'll probably skip that. Now what we do also have though is air vents back here. They're in the ceiling, we have a separate temperature zone here in the second row, we've got more USB ports, and we have this armrest which has 2 cup holders just to make life a little bit easier on those longer drives. And unlike some rivals, you really can fit a 5th person in the second row because the hump in the floor is so small. There's also been greater room worked into the travel of the second row, so you can now push it forward, not uncomfortably so, but liberate an absolutely huge amount of space for people in the third row, which is now truly adult-sized. The styling of the new Toyota Kluger is supposed to be suave and sophisticated, and I think in a lot of ways they've succeeded. It is a more attractive vehicle in 4th generation form than the outgoing 3rd gen car, which had a few awkward angles. But interestingly, we were told by the Deputy Chief Engineer the inspiration for the design was in fact James Bond, who is mature and sophisticated. You can let me know down below in the comments what you think about that comparison, but what I will tell you is that this very deep blue example here in Grande form really does come up quite nicely in person. Now you get a power tailgate on the top spec car or the GXL, beeps all the way up just to make sure you know, but it opens up to reveal a greater amount of boot space than the car it replaces. 241 litres of space if you have all 3 rows up, leaving plenty of room for groceries or school bags. And then it's an easy fold of the rear row, which drops nice and flat, opening up to 552 litres of space. Underneath this boot floor, you'll find a toolkit and a storage space for the cargo cover, but the spare wheel is actually mounted underneath the vehicle. A little bit less convenient, but better than many rivals that don't have a spare at all. On the back of the power tailgate, you've got a button just to close it. There's no separate lock button up there. Also worth noting, the GX gets a manual door, the base model. The GX also misses out on the silver roof runners that make life a bit easier if you want to mount roof racks, a bike carrier, that sort of thing to the top of the car. So then, what's the new Toyota Kluger like to drive? Well, we've actually come to my favorite part of this review, because while the new Kluger looks pretty nice outside, it's conservative, but it's quite handsome. The interior is a pleasant place to spend time, it's roomy in the back, it's got a decent sized boot, the running costs are acceptable, particularly on the hybrid version. It's actually the driving that has easily improved the most for the Toyota Kluger compared to the 3rd generation to this new 4th gen version. Now, no shade to you if you bought and run an outgoing Kluger, because in a lot of ways they are a very pragmatic and reliable car, but they were not good to drive. The body control was inadequate, the engine was thirsty, there was no real handling prowess to be had. The car to buy in the segment, if you're interested in driving in any way, was the Mazda CX-9. But the CX-9 now has a challenger for sure, because the Toyota Kluger's biggest improvement, generation over generation, is in the driving department. This car has catapulted from towards the bottom of the segment for driving dynamics to near the top. And that is a huge achievement, no matter what else you say about the Kluger. The body control difference is night and day. The car no longer pitches and rocks around under acceleration and braking. It sits so much more flat in the corners when you start to drive with a bit more verve, like I am now out here in the country. And in town, what that means is that the car is just far less sort of seasickness inducing because it's not rocking and rolling around. It feels like one piece You know, Toyota are very proud of the fact that the Kluger was one of the first large SUVs to be car-based and not ute-based. But it's only now with the 4th generation version that it really feels like that. And that is a huge achievement. And I'll come back to the ride and handling momentarily. First of all, let's talk about the engines, because the 3.5 litre V6 is still available. Really the only major changes to the V6 are that there is a new 8-speed automatic gearbox. It's not entirely new, but it has a bunch of new componentry, and the engine has a start-stop system to save about 5% of fuel consumption. But otherwise, it's still got 218 kilowatts of power, 350 newton meters of torque. It's a good V6, no doubt about it. Direct injected, sounds good, it's torquey, but it is very thirsty in a large car like the Kluger. Consumption of 12-13 litres per 100 Ks is realistic. Worse than that if you like to actually exploit that good engine sound and really rev it out everywhere. It's the addition of a new hybrid which gives the Kluger a trump card in this space. So we've got the 2.5 litre petrol 4-cylinder, new engine for Toyota in the last couple of years, paired to 3 electric motors, 2 at the front and 1 at the rear. And it's the one at the rear that provides the hybrid's all-wheel drive system. And unlike the RAV4, you can only get the Kluger hybrid with all-wheel drive. That makes the base price a little expensive, particularly given you can get a 2-wheel drive V6 for like 6 grand less. So if you're shopping toward the bottom of the range, a V6 2-wheel drive probably makes the most sense. But if cost isn't your first factor, and you just want a really well-rounded, reliable family 7-seater that's cheap to run, then something like this Grande hybrid or the GXL hybrid is a really, really good buy. So we have more power than the RAV4, and that's because the front electric motor setup is more powerful. The engine makes the same amount of power, it's the motors that have become more powerful. And you really can tell the difference in terms of grunt. Now the Kluger is bigger and heavier than the RAV4, so it doesn't feel outright fast or anything, but it never struggles. Now, I'll be fair, it's only me in the car right now. I haven't driven the Kluger yet loaded up with passengers and cargo, but the hybrid is pretty fleet-footed. It accelerates easily, pulling up this long hill here with no real din. The engine is active, but I can't hear it. Just a little flutter in the background. So it pairs well with the CVT automatic. In fact, the CVT isn't really an issue because the system has enough torque so that the engine doesn't always have to rev out. But even so, the engine is well insulated. Now, no doubt the V6 is a little bit faster, but the hybrid isn't far behind. It's not far enough behind to go, I've got to have the V6. You can easily live with the hybrid. The fact they'll both tow 2 tons shows you the performance difference, and the torque difference in particular is pretty minimal. And the fuel economy difference is massive. On our testing today, the hybrid's done about 7 litres per 100 Ks. This has been mostly country driving, fairly energetic driving, as tends to be the case on car launches, so you can definitely do better than me today, particularly if most of your running is suburban, which for most people it is in a car like the Kluger. Just like the RAV4 and the Camry hybrid, when you're on light throttle, if you're braking, going downhill, just coasting, the Kluger's 2.5 litre hybrid is really keen to get into EV mode. So you spend a lot of time in silence. It's a really refined system, and detecting that step between electric and petrol is almost imperceptible. Toyota have worked really hard on this point over the years, and you can tell. And one improvement that you can certainly detect in the Kluger compared to the RAV4 is the brake pedal feel, which is quite a bit more natural in this bigger car. That's something that has been a struggle with hybrids, getting that brake pedal to feel natural, but it's not too bad here. Now, back to the ride and handling. The main difference you'll get on your different Kluger specs is the wheel size, because there's only one suspension tune, single mode dampers, single mode steering. It's all pretty fixed. And that's okay, because the engineers have settled on the right settings. Now, Australia is one of relatively few markets for the Kluger. It is offered in Europe and the UK now, which is quite interesting, but Australia has always had a decent amount of say in how the Kluger drives, and you can really tell because it feels like a great fit on our roads. There is a little bit of natural motion as you're driving it. It's not, a sports SUV, but that's not really what you want in a car like this. It biases comfort, but much less than the previous version.
So there's a good amount of firmness to the suspension. As I said, it doesn't induce that sort of seasickness character. It turns in really nicely. There's a really, really good steering ratio, just like I said about our long-term RAV4. There's really no feel to the steering, but the weighting is right, the ratio is good, so you just sort of build up a rhythm with the new Kluger. That's something I couldn't have imagined myself saying about the old one. Similarly, the fixed mode suspension is just right. Just breathes nicely down the road, this car. It's quite similar to a CX-9 in that regard. Both run on 20-inch wheels with single mode suspension and both just get it right. Now if you go for a lower end Kluger, you do get smaller wheels which are even more cushioning, but the Grande is totally fine. And you can see by the tyres, there's still quite a lot of sidewall going on here. The weak link is the tyres. So we've got Toyo open country tyres. The RAV4 arrived in Australia on Bridgestone lenses, which just have a higher limit of grip. It's not terrible, but you know, you can probably hear that scrub. A slightly better tyre would have been appropriate for the Kluger because its dynamic limits are now a lot higher. So if I ran one, I'd probably get through this first set and then switch over to a sportier tyre. Now, safety stuff. Toyota have really democratized the availability of safety tech. So every Kluger is fitted with front and rear AEB, adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist with lane tracing. Still not good enough at detecting the lines and holding a lane center on a country road. In town and on the highway, it's pretty good. But on a country road, it's distracting, and I found myself turning it off. Blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert are also standard. If you move up to the Grande, you get a 360-degree parking camera rather than just a standard reversing camera. I should mention front and rear parking sensors are also standard on the Kluger, which is something that you'll want because it's big. There's no avoiding that. But when you're sitting in my position, driving the Kluger, finally this car feels like it shrinks around you. Really good improvement. So in terms of which Kluger I'd go for, it'd be this one. Yeah, okay, it's easy for me, a motoring journalist, to say, just buy the most expensive one. That's not always the case. There often is a sweet spot in a range that isn't the most expensive. It just so happens in the Kluger, the Grande, hybrid, all-wheel drive is so well set up. You're not really left feeling like you're missing out. Yeah, a bigger screen would have been nicer, wireless CarPlay would have been nicer. But apart from that, it's really tidy. Well done to Toyota. Listening to feedback and implementing change. Not everyone does it, and certainly not as well as this.
So those are my first impressions of the new 4th generation Toyota Kluger. No doubt the addition of a hybrid powertrain is a good decision for this large family SUV, as it really does cut your real world fuel consumption and therefore leaves more cash in your wallet. But given it's such a big jump over the basic 2-wheel drive V6, it is more difficult to justify than buying a RAV4 hybrid over that base engine. And that's why I think they really should have done a 2-wheel drive hybrid for the Kluger. But we'll have to wait and see exactly how many hybrids people choose to take up, what the share of the V6 is, to really get an idea of how much demand is out there. But of course, you can let me know what you think down below this video. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.